The corner of the pillowcase was perfectly aligned with the headboard, exactly 45 degrees measured to the millimeter. Victoria Hayes stepped back from the king-sized bed, her trained eye scanning every surface for imperfection. The hospital corners were tight enough to bounce a quarter off, the decorative pillows arranged in precise geometric harmony, and the throw blanket folded with creases so sharp they could cut paper. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Most guests at the Alpine Lodge never noticed these details. They saw a beautifully made bed and moved on with their vacation plans. But what they didn't know was that every movement Victoria made followed military protocol learned in classified training facilities, where a misaligned sheet could mean the difference between life and death in operational readiness. For 8 years, she had been the head housekeeper at Colorado's most exclusive mountain resort, and in all that time nobody had questioned why her rooms were consistently rated the highest by guests, or why she could strip and remake an entire suite in under 12 minutes with mechanical precision that seemed almost supernatural. Nobody questioned it because Victoria Hayes was invisible in all the ways that mattered. She arrived before dawn, worked with quiet efficiency, and disappeared into the mountain landscape when her shift ended. The staff respected her. The guests complimented management on their exceptional service, and the owners of the Alpine Lodge had never once received a complaint about her work. But invisibility was exactly what she had spent 8 years perfecting. Pinewood Valley, Colorado, population 3,847, nestled between towering peaks that caught snow 9 months of the year and tourists the other 3. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, except when it came to Victoria Hayes. She had arrived in town with nothing but a battered Honda Civic, a resume showing hotel experience that checked out perfectly, and a quiet manner that discouraged personal questions. The Alpine Lodge sat like a crown jewel against the backdrop of evergreen forests and granite cliffs, catering to wealthy visitors who came for the skiing in winter and hiking in summer. 4 stories of rustic luxury, each room commanding premium prices for the promise of authentic Colorado mountain experiences delivered with 5-star service. Victoria's domain encompassed the entire 3rd floor, 12 luxury suites that she maintained with an efficiency that bordered on the miraculous. While other housekeeping staff took 45 minutes per room, Victoria completed her rounds in exactly 8 hours, every day, without exception. Her rooms were always ready ahead of schedule, always perfect, always somehow cleaner than the day before. The other housekeepers had theories, of course. Maria Gonzalez, who worked the 2nd floor, swore Victoria had some kind of photographic memory that let her remember exactly where every item belonged. Janet Walsh from the 1st floor thought she must have worked at some fancy European hotel where they trained people to obsessive standards. Even Lisa Park, the hotel manager, couldn't quite figure out how Victoria consistently achieved results that made the Alpine Lodge's online reviews read like love letters to superior service. What none of them knew was that Victoria Hayes approached every room like a tactical operation. She entered with situational awareness that cataloged potential threats and escape routes. She cleaned with movements that conserved energy and maximized efficiency because her muscle memory had been programmed in facilities where wasted motion could get you killed. She arranged furniture and personal items in patterns that would reveal if anyone had searched the room in her absence. Every morning at 5:47 a.m., Victoria's internal clock woke her without need for an alarm. She lived in a small cabin 15 minutes up the mountain road, a place she had chosen specifically for its single-access route and clear sightlines in all directions. The cabin was spartanly furnished with military precision, every item serving a specific purpose, every surface clear of unnecessary clutter. Her breakfast was the same every day: black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast. She read the Denver Post online while eating, scanning not just the local news but paying particular attention to stories about military activities, government contracts, and anything that might suggest increased federal attention in Colorado. Old habits died hard, and Victoria had learned long ago that information was survival. By 6:30 a.m., she was driving down the mountain road toward the Alpine Lodge, taking a route that let her observe any unusual vehicles or people who might be watching the area. The Honda Civic was deliberately unremarkable, maintained in perfect mechanical condition, but showing just enough wear to blend in with the vehicles of other service workers in Pinewood Valley. The hotel came alive around her like a well-orchestrated performance. Front desk staff arrived to prepare for checkout procedures, maintenance crews began their daily rounds, and the kitchen staff started prep work for the restaurant that served guests who paid more for breakfast than most people in town made in a day. Victoria moved through this world like a ghost, acknowledged but not truly seen, essential but invisible. Her first room was always Suite 301, partly because it was at the end of the hall where she could work without distraction, but mainly because it offered the best vantage point to observe the hotel's main entrance and parking area. While she stripped linens and sorted towels, her peripheral vision tracked every vehicle that arrived, every person who entered the building, every deviation from normal patterns. The bed-making process was where Victoria's true nature showed most clearly, though nobody understood what they were witnessing. She had learned these techniques at Fort Bragg during specialized training that officially never existed, where soldiers were taught to maintain operational readiness in any environment. A properly made bed wasn't just about comfort for the next guest. It was about discipline, attention to detail, and the kind of muscle memory that could function under extreme stress. First, the mattress was stripped completely and inspected for any signs of damage or wear. Victoria's hands moved across the surface with the sensitivity of someone trained to detect concealed weapons or surveillance devices. She rotated the mattress slightly to ensure even wear patterns, a habit that extended its life and maintained consistent comfort levels. The bottom sheet went on with hospital corners tight enough to meet military inspection standards. The technique required precise folding angles that created tension across the entire surface, eliminating wrinkles and ensuring the sheet wouldn't shift during use. Victoria's movements were economical and practiced, each fold executed with mechanical precision that spoke of thousands of repetitions under demanding conditions. The top sheet followed with edges aligned to mathematical precision. Victoria used a mental measuring system based on hand spans and finger widths, calibrations she had learned during tactical training, where approximating distances could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The sheet was pulled tight and tucked with corners that formed perfect right angles. Pillows were fluffed according to a specific technique that distributed filling evenly while creating maximum volume. Victoria had learned this skill not from hotel training manuals, but from field medicine courses where proper pillow positioning could prevent pressure sores during extended medical evacuations. She arranged them with spacing that looked casually elegant, but followed ergonomic principles designed for optimal neck and spine alignment. The decorative elements, throw pillows, blankets, and accent pieces, were positioned according to what appeared to be aesthetic sensibility, but actually followed security protocols Victoria had internalized years ago. Each item was placed to create clear sightlines across the room, to avoid creating hiding spots for potential threats, and to serve as markers that would reveal if the room had been searched or compromised. What impressed the hotel management and guests wasn't just the perfection of Victoria's work, but the speed at which she achieved it. While other housekeepers moved through rooms with casual efficiency, Victoria operated with the purposeful intensity of someone trained to complete critical tasks under time pressure. She could remake a bed in under 3 minutes, clean a bathroom to surgical standards in 5, and vacuum an entire suite in 2 minutes flat. But speed was never achieved at the expense of thoroughness. Victoria's cleaning protocols went far beyond hotel standards because they were based on decontamination procedures learned in classified facilities. She used specific patterns for wiping surfaces that ensured complete coverage while minimizing the risk of cross-contamination. Her methods for handling linens and towels followed procedures designed to prevent the spread of biological hazards in field conditions. The other staff at the Alpine Lodge had long since stopped trying to match Victoria's pace or precision. They respected her professionalism and relied on her expertise when dealing with difficult situations. But they also maintained a certain distance that Victoria did nothing to discourage. She was friendly enough to avoid seeming antisocial, helpful enough to be valued by management, but private enough that nobody really knew anything about her life outside the hotel. Lisa Park, the hotel manager, had tried several times over the years to promote Victoria to assistant manager or head of housekeeping operations, positions that would have meant more money and authority but also more visibility and scrutiny. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria had politely declined each offer, citing her preference for hands-on work and her satisfaction with her current role. What she didn't mention was that advancement would have required background checks and references that might attract the wrong kind of attention. The town of Pinewood Valley suited Victoria perfectly because it existed in a sweet spot between accessibility and isolation. Close enough to Denver that she could disappear into urban anonymity if necessary, but remote enough that federal agencies didn't maintain a regular presence. The seasonal population flux of tourists meant that strangers didn't attract attention, and the local culture valued privacy and self-reliance above curiosity about neighbors, business. During her 8 years in Pinewood Valley, Victoria had built a carefully calibrated life that balanced necessary human connections with operational security. She had casual relationships with coworkers, nodded to neighbors at the grocery store, and attended enough community events to seem normal without becoming memorable. She volunteered occasionally at the local animal shelter, not from sentiment, but because it provided cover for activities that kept her tactical skills sharp. The shelter work let her practice medical techniques on injured animals, maintaining familiarity with field medicine procedures she hoped never to need again. The hiking trails around Pinewood Valley gave her opportunities for physical training disguised as recreational activity, keeping her fitness levels at standards that would have impressed her old instructors. The cabin's location provided perfect conditions for maintaining and testing equipment that hotel guests would never dream existed in their housekeeping staff's personal life. Because hidden in the abandoned mine shaft 2 miles behind Victoria's cabin, sealed from weather and prying eyes, sat a piece of her past that she maintained with the same obsessive precision she brought to making beds. The equipment required weekly maintenance checks, fuel system monitoring, and regular operational testing that Victoria disguised as late-night hiking expeditions into the backcountry. Every Sunday evening, when the hotel was fully staffed for Monday arrivals and her presence wouldn't be missed, Victoria would disappear into the mountains carrying camping gear that concealed tools and supplies for maintaining machinery that officially didn't exist. She would spend hours in the darkness of the mine shaft running diagnostics on systems that hadn't been activated in years but remained in perfect operational readiness. It was insurance, she told herself. A contingency plan for situations that would probably never arise. But deep down, Victoria knew that some skills never really went dormant, and some identities never completely disappeared. She had spent 8 years being the perfect housekeeper, but perfection itself was what made her dangerous. The precision that guests admired in her room service was the same attention to detail that had once made her the most reliable operative in her unit. The efficiency that impressed hotel management was the same ability to perform under pressure that had kept her alive in situations where hesitation meant death. The invisibility that let her blend into Pinewood Valley was the same skill that had once made her disappear from official records, when disappearing became a matter of survival. Victoria Hayes had built the perfect cover identity, but perfection had its own vulnerabilities. And on a quiet Tuesday morning in October, as she arranged decorative pillows with mathematical precision in Suite 301, she had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to be shattered by someone who recognized military excellence when they saw it. The guest in Suite 301 had checked out early that morning, but something about the way he had looked at the perfectly made bed before leaving suggested he had seen more than just exceptional housekeeping service. There had been recognition in his eyes, the kind that came from understanding what true military precision looked like when disguised as civilian work. Victoria finished the room and moved on to Suite 302, maintaining her usual efficiency while a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that after 8 years of perfect invisibility, someone might finally be asking the right questions about why the Alpine Lodge's head housekeeper worked like a soldier preparing for inspection. But soldiers, even retired ones, knew how to adapt to changing circumstances. And Victoria Hayes had survived worse situations than curious hotel guests, who noticed things they shouldn't have noticed. The question was whether her carefully built life in Pinewood Valley could survive the attention of someone who might know exactly what they were looking at when they saw military precision disguised as hotel service. Time would tell, but Victoria had learned long ago that survival meant being prepared for every possibility, even the ones that seemed impossible until they were standing in your carefully organized world, asking questions that could unravel everything you had built. As she moved through her rounds that Tuesday morning, Victoria's trained senses picked up subtle changes in the hotel's atmosphere. Staff members seemed more alert, management moved with slightly more purpose, and there was an undercurrent of anticipation that suggested something was about to happen. She had felt this before, in other places and other lives, when the careful balance between visibility and secrecy was about to shift in ways that could not be controlled or predicted. It was the feeling that came just before everything changed, when years of careful preparation met moments of unavoidable crisis. Victoria Hayes finished her shift with the same precision she brought to every task, but as she drove up the mountain road toward her cabin that evening, she found herself checking her mirrors more frequently and taking note of vehicles she didn't recognize. After 8 years of perfect invisibility, the hunter's instincts that had never really gone dormant were beginning to wake up. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded like her old commanding officer was reminding her that no cover identity, no matter how perfect, could last forever. The question wasn't whether her past would catch up with her, but when, and whether she would be ready when it did. The black sedan appeared in the Alpine Lodge parking lot at precisely 9:17 a.m. on a Wednesday morning when the October aspen leaves painted the mountainside in shades of gold and crimson. Victoria noticed it immediately because it violated every pattern she had memorized about the hotel's typical traffic flow. Government vehicles had a particular stillness to them, a weight that spoke of reinforced panels and occupants trained to wait with predatory patience. She was in Suite 308, replacing towels in the marble bathroom when her peripheral vision caught the sedan's arrival through the window that overlooked the main entrance. 2 figures emerged with movements that screamed federal training despite their civilian clothes. The driver was tall and lean with the posture of someone comfortable carrying concealed weapons, while his companion moved with the measured precision of a senior operative accustomed to command authority. Victoria's hands never paused in their work, continuing to fold towels with mechanical perfection while her mind shifted into threat assessment mode. She cataloged escape routes, calculated response times, and evaluated the tactical implications of being cornered in a 4th-floor hotel suite with limited options for evasion or concealment. The elevator chimed in the distance, followed by the soft whisper of expensive shoes on carpeted hallway. Victoria finished the bathroom and moved to the bedroom, maintaining her housekeeping routine while positioning herself where she could observe the corridor through the partially open door. Her cleaning cart was strategically placed to provide both cover and mobility if the situation demanded rapid movement. Footsteps approached with deliberate slowness, the kind of pace that suggested the walkers knew exactly where they were going and had no concerns about their target attempting to flee. Victoria recognized the psychology of the approach, confident, unhurried, designed to demonstrate control of the situation before any words were exchanged. The knock on the door frame was polite but firm, the sound of knuckles that had learned to announce authority without aggression. Victoria looked up from the bed she was making, her expression showing nothing more than mild curiosity at the interruption to her work routine. Marcus Sullivan stood in the doorway wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit too well to be government issue, suggesting either private sector money or a federal budget that didn't appear on public accounting. His companion remained in the hallway, positioned where he could observe both directions while maintaining visual contact with the room. Classic surveillance positioning that confirmed Victoria's initial assessment of their professional background. Victoria Hayes? Sullivan's voice carried the kind of authority that expected immediate acknowledgement. He stepped into the room without invitation, his eyes scanning the space with the trained awareness of someone accustomed to assessing tactical environments. "That's what my name tag says." Victoria straightened up from the bed, her hands still holding the decorative pillow she had been arranging. To any observer, she appeared relaxed and cooperative, but her weight was balanced on the balls of her feet, and her grip on the pillow positioned it where it could serve as either shield or projectile depending on how the conversation developed. Sullivan smiled with the practiced warmth of someone who had learned to disarm subjects before interrogation. "I'm Agent Sullivan, Department of Defense Personnel Security. This is my partner, Agent Cross. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your employment history." The introduction was deliberately vague, designed to gauge her reaction without revealing the true scope of their investigation. Victoria had heard similar approaches before, in other lives and other circumstances where government representatives arrived with questions that had no good answers. "I've been working here for 8 years. Victoria replied, setting the pillow down with precise placement that brought her closer to the bathroom door and its potential for defensive positioning. If there's some problem with my background check, you should probably talk to Lisa Park, the hotel manager. Cross shifted position in the hallway, a subtle movement that blocked the most direct route to the elevator. The coordination was smooth and practiced, suggesting these two had worked together long enough to communicate through minimal gestures and understood each other's tactical preferences. Sullivan pulled out a tablet, swiping to display what appeared to be personnel files and background documentation. Your employment record shows consistent performance and excellent references, but there are some gaps in your history that we'd like to clarify, specifically the period between 2010 and 2016. The dates hit Victoria like ice water in her veins, but her expression remained professionally neutral. Those were the years that officially didn't exist, when she had been someone else entirely, operating in places that appeared on no maps and completing missions that generated no after-action reports. "I did some traveling after college," she said, resuming her bed-making with movements that appeared casual but positioned her hands near the cleaning supplies that could serve as improvised weapons if the conversation took a hostile turn. "Worked at various hotels across Europe, mostly cash jobs that didn't generate much paperwork." Sullivan nodded, as if her explanation was perfectly reasonable, but his eyes never stopped cataloging details about the room's arrangement and her positioning within it. "That's interesting. We have reports suggesting you might have had some specialized training during that period. Medical training, perhaps, or experience with aircraft maintenance." The fishing expedition was becoming more obvious, but Victoria recognized the technique. They had fragments of information but were hoping she would provide connections that would complete their intelligence picture. The question was how much they actually knew versus how much they were guessing. "I took a first aid course when I was working at a ski resort in Switzerland," Victoria replied, smoothing the top sheet with precise hand movements that maintained the perfect tension she had learned to achieve in military facilities. Hotels like their staff to be prepared for guest emergencies. "As for aircraft, I've never been comfortable with flying." Cross spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight southern accent that suggested military background in one of the southeastern training facilities. "Ma'am, we're not here to cause any trouble. We're actually hoping someone with your particular skill set might be willing to help with a situation that's developed." The shift in approach was textbook interrogation technique. Establish authority, probe for information, then transition to recruitment when direct confrontation proved unproductive. Victoria had seen the pattern before and recognized that these two were more sophisticated than typical government representatives. "I'm not sure what skills you think I have," Victoria said, moving to the window where she could observe the parking lot while appearing to check the curtain alignment. "I make beds, clean bathrooms, and occasionally help guests with directions to local attractions. Nothing that would interest the Department of Defense." Sullivan consulted his tablet again, scrolling through information that could have been genuine intelligence files or elaborate props designed to create the impression of comprehensive surveillance. "Actually, we've been observing some interesting patterns in your work. The precision, the timing, the attention to detail that goes far beyond standard hospitality training." The observation confirmed Victoria's growing suspicion that her 8 years of careful invisibility had been compromised by someone who understood what military excellence looked like when disguised as civilian deployment. The question remained whether this was random discovery or targeted investigation based on specific intelligence. "I take pride in my work," Victoria replied, adjusting the decorative pillows with mathematical precision that had become second nature after years of maintaining her cover identity. "The Alpine Lodge has high standards, and I try to meet them." Cross moved into the room, positioning himself where he could observe both Victoria and the hallway while his partner continued the verbal probing. The coordination suggested they had conducted similar interviews before and had developed effective techniques for managing potentially dangerous subjects. "The thing is," Sullivan continued, "we've had some reports from other guests who've stayed in rooms you've serviced. Military personnel, mostly, who noticed that certain details reminded them of barracks inspections and field preparation protocols." Victoria felt the careful walls of her constructed identity beginning to show stress fractures. Someone had been watching her work and recognizing the patterns that civilian observers missed. Military guests would notice things that escaped typical hotel customers, and the reports would carry weight with federal investigators. "Military people tend to appreciate order and cleanliness," she said, continuing her work routine while calculating the distance to various exits and potential defensive positions. "I suppose my attention to detail might remind them of their training. but that doesn't mean I have any military background myself." Sullivan closed the tablet and focused his full attention on Victoria, with the intensity of someone accustomed to breaking down resistance through sustained psychological pressure. "We know about Fort Bragg, Victoria. We know about the 7th Special Operations Aviation Regiment and your service record with the unit that officially never existed." The direct confrontation shattered any pretense of casual inquiry, confirming that these weren't fishing expeditions or random investigations. They possessed specific intelligence about her military service and had come to Pinewood Valley with definite objectives that went far beyond routine background verification. Victoria stopped working and faced Sullivan directly, her posture shifting subtly from accommodating service worker to someone prepared for conflict. The transformation was minimal but unmistakable to trained observers, a change in bearing that suggested years of combat training suddenly available for immediate application. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, her voice carrying a new edge that hinted at capabilities hidden beneath the housekeeper's uniform. "Victoria Hayes has worked at this hotel for 8 years. That's a matter of public record." Cross smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose investigation had just confirmed crucial intelligence. "Public records can be created, ma'am. Identities can be constructed. But training leaves traces that are harder to erase, especially when someone maintains the same standards of excellence in civilian life that they demonstrated in military service." The conversation had crossed into territory where denial was no longer viable, but Victoria recognized that admission could be equally dangerous. These agents had arrived with specific objectives, and their recruitment approach suggested they needed her cooperation, rather than simply seeking to expose her constructed identity. "Assuming for the sake of argument that you're right about my background," Victoria said, resuming her cleaning routine while maintaining visual contact with both agents, "what exactly do you want from a hotel housekeeper who supposedly has some military training in her past?" Sullivan exchanged a meaningful glance with Cross, the kind of communication that preceded critical phases of recruitment operations. "There's a situation developing that requires someone with very specific capabilities: helicopter piloting skills, tactical training, and the ability to operate independently in hostile environments." The mention of helicopter piloting confirmed that their intelligence went beyond casual observation of housekeeping techniques. They possessed detailed knowledge of her specialized training and understood the full scope of capabilities she had been hiding behind her civilian employment. "Even if I had those skills," Victoria replied, moving to the dresser where she began arranging guest amenities with the same precision she applied to every task. "I've been out of that world for 8 years. Military skills deteriorate without constant practice and ongoing training." Cross stepped closer, his movement casual but calculated to reduce her maneuvering space within the room. "Actually, we have evidence suggesting you've been maintaining your proficiency quite well. Weekly trips into the mountains, activities that correspond with the kind of practice sessions someone might use to keep flying skills current." The revelation that they had been conducting surveillance of her personal activities sent alarm signals through Victoria's nervous system. If they knew about her maintenance trips to the abandoned mine shaft, they might also know about the equipment she had been keeping operational for 8 years. "I enjoy hiking," Victoria said, her tone suggesting mild confusion at their interest in her recreational activities. "Colorado has excellent trails, and I like the exercise after spending all day working indoors." Sullivan pulled out his phone and displayed a series of photographs that made Victoria's carefully maintained composure crack for the first time since they had entered the room. The images showed her cabin, her Honda Civic parked at various trailheads, and thermal signatures that suggested mechanical activity in locations where no legitimate operations should be generating heat patterns. "Hiking is a great hobby," Sullivan agreed, scrolling through additional surveillance photos that documented her movements with disturbing precision. "But most hikers don't carry the kind of equipment you've been transporting, and they don't spend 6 hours in abandoned mine shafts performing what appears to be maintenance work on machinery that generates significant electromagnetic signatures." The scope of their surveillance operation became clear, revealing months or possibly years of observation that had penetrated her carefully constructed security measures. Victoria realized that her 8 years of invisibility had been an illusion, that someone had been watching and documenting her activities while she believed herself safely hidden in Pinewood Valley. "You've been busy," she observed, abandoning any pretense of continuing her housekeeping routine. "Federal surveillance of law-abiding citizens must keep you occupied." Cross moved to the window, positioning himself where he could observe the parking lot while maintaining tactical awareness of the room's dynamics. "We're not here to arrest you or expose your identity, ma'am. We're here because there's a situation that requires your particular expertise, and frankly, you're the only person available who has the necessary qualifications." The recruitment pitch was becoming explicit, confirming Victoria's assessment that they needed her cooperation rather than seeking to eliminate a security risk. The question remained whether their offer represented genuine opportunity or elaborate trap designed to neutralize someone who possessed dangerous knowledge. "What kind of situation?" Victoria asked, recognizing that the conversation had moved beyond the point where evasion was possible or productive. Sullivan consulted his phone again, displaying what appeared to be mission briefing materials that suggested urgent timeline and high-priority authorization. "There's a team of American operatives trapped in hostile territory. Standard extraction protocols have failed, weather conditions are deteriorating, and the window for successful rescue is closing rapidly." The scenario was familiar from Victoria's military experience: high-risk extraction requiring specialized piloting skills and someone willing to fly into conditions that would ground conventional aircraft. The kind of mission that officially never happened and generated no public acknowledgement when successful. "Send someone else," Victoria replied, returning to her bed-making with movements that had become more efficient as stress levels increased. "The military has plenty of qualified pilots who are actually current on their training and familiar with modern equipment." Cross turned from the window, his expression showing the frustration of someone whose recruitment effort was encountering unexpected resistance. "We've tried conventional approaches. 3 different pilots have refused the mission after reviewing the tactical situation. Too dangerous, they said. Impossible flight conditions, and minimal chance of successful extraction." Victoria recognized the psychology of the pitch, established that conventional resources had failed before approaching the unconventional option that only she could provide. It was recruitment technique designed to appeal to professional pride and sense of responsibility for fellow service members. "If 3 qualified pilots refuse the mission," Victoria said, smoothing the coverlet with precise hand movements that belied the tension building in her shoulders, "maybe the mission parameters need to be reconsidered rather than finding someone desperate enough or crazy enough to attempt the impossible." Sullivan stepped closer, his voice dropping to the confidential tone used for sharing classified information that carried personal significance. "One of the trapped operatives specifically requested you if conventional extraction failed. Tommy Chen, currently a Navy SEAL, formerly an Army Ranger who served under your command during classified operations in Afghanistan." The name hit Victoria like a physical blow, bringing back memories of a 19-year-old soldier who had looked at her with absolute trust during missions where trust was the only thing standing between survival and catastrophic failure. Tommy Chen had been her responsibility, her protégé, the kid she had promised to bring home from every operation they undertook together. "Tommy's dead," Victoria said quietly, her hands stilling on the perfectly arranged bedding. "He died in a training accident 3 years ago. I read about it in the Army Times." Cross pulled out a tablet showing current intelligence photos that revealed a man Victoria recognized, despite the passage of years and the hard experience written in lines around his eyes. "Tommy Chen is very much alive and currently pinned down with his team in a canyon system in Syria. The training accident was cover for his transfer to highly classified special operations." The revelation that Tommy had survived and continued operating in the shadow world she had left behind created emotional complications Victoria had not anticipated. Professional soldiers learned to compartmentalize personal attachments, but some bonds transcended official relationships and created obligations that survived changes in duty status. "Show me the mission parameters," Victoria said, her voice carrying new authority that suggested the hotel housekeeper was giving way to someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. Sullivan smiled with satisfaction as he opened detailed tactical briefings that confirmed the conversation had shifted from recruitment to operational planning. "The extraction site is in mountainous terrain similar to Afghanistan, but with weather conditions that make conventional helicopter operations extremely hazardous. Multiple hostile forces, limited landing options, and a narrow window for successful extraction." Victoria studied the intelligence materials with eyes that automatically processed tactical information according to training that had never really gone dormant. Flight paths, threat assessments, equipment requirements, and timeline constraints, all filtered through mental processes, that had been programmed for exactly this kind of analysis. "What's the real timeline?" she asked, recognizing that official briefings often understated urgency to prevent panic-driven decision-making. Cross consulted his phone, scrolling through updates that suggested fluid tactical situation requiring constant monitoring. 12 hours before weather conditions make flight operations impossible. After that, the extraction site becomes inaccessible for at least a week, and hostile forces will have overwhelming advantages in locating and eliminating the trapped team. The compressed time frame was designed to pressure immediate commitment, but Victoria recognized genuine operational urgency in the agents, manner, and the quality of intelligence they were sharing. This wasn't recruitment theater, it was crisis response requiring immediate action. "Assuming I agree to help," Victoria said, continuing to study the mission briefings while part of her mind calculated the logistical requirements for transitioning from hotel housekeeper to combat pilot. "What resources are available, and where do I access the necessary equipment?" Sullivan's expression showed relief at her shift from resistance to tactical planning. "We have a fully equipped helicopter waiting at a private airfield 40 minutes from here. Latest avionics, defensive systems, and modifications specifically requested based on your known preferences and operational style." The speed with which they could produce specialized equipment suggested this recruitment effort had been planned well in advance, with resources positioned before they ever approached her at the Alpine Lodge. Victoria recognized the efficiency of a well-funded operation with high-level authorization and unlimited access to classified resources. "I'll need time to prepare," Victoria said, folding the guest information folder with precise creases that had become automatic after years of maintaining her cover identity. "Personal equipment, route planning, and coordination with whatever support elements you're providing." Cross moved toward the door, his body language suggesting operational urgency that required immediate transition from planning to execution. "Time is the one resource we don't have. The helicopter is fueled and ready, communications equipment is installed, and weather windows are closing faster than originally projected." Victoria looked around the hotel room that had been her workplace for 8 years, seeing it with new awareness of how completely her carefully constructed life was about to change. The bed she had just made with military precision would be serviced by someone else tomorrow, and Victoria Hayes, the hotel housekeeper, would disappear as completely as if she had never existed. "Give me 20 minutes to finish this room and collect my things," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having orders followed without question. "Then I'll need detailed intelligence updates during the drive to the airfield." Sullivan nodded with satisfaction as he headed toward the hallway where additional team members were undoubtedly waiting to provide transportation and operational support. 20 minutes. After that, Victoria Hayes disappears and someone else takes over. As the agents left to make their preparations, Victoria continued making the bed with the same precision she had maintained for 8 years, but now every movement carried the weight of farewell. She was folding away an identity that had served its purpose and preparing to resume another life that she had hoped never to need again. The decorative pillows were arranged with mathematical precision one final time, the coverlet smoothed to eliminate every wrinkle, and the room prepared to standards that would have passed military inspection. But Victoria knew that when she walked out of Suite 308, she would be leaving behind more than just a housekeeping job. She was about to discover whether 8 years of carefully maintained skills were sufficient for a mission that had already defeated 3 active military pilots, and whether loyalty to a young soldier she had once commanded was worth risking the perfect invisibility she had spent almost a decade creating. In 20 minutes, Victoria Hayes would cease to exist, and someone much more dangerous would take her place. The private airfield sat in a valley between 2 ridgelines, hidden from casual observation and accessible only through a gravel road that wound through dense pine forest. Victoria had changed from her hotel uniform into tactical clothing retrieved from her cabin: black cargo pants, moisture-wicking shirt, and boots designed for extended operations in hostile terrain. The transformation was more than cosmetic. With each piece of equipment she donned, Victoria Hayes, the housekeeper, receded further into memory. The helicopter waiting on the tarmac was a modified Blackhawk that bore no military markings, but carried upgrades that spoke of unlimited federal budgets and classified modification programs. Enhanced rotor systems for high-altitude operations, armored cockpit plating, advanced avionics that included threat detection systems, and communication equipment that could maintain encrypted contact across intercontinental distances. Agent Sullivan stood beside the aircraft with a tablet displaying real-time intelligence updates from the operational area. Weather conditions are deteriorating faster than projected, he reported as Victoria approached, her stride carrying the purposeful efficiency of someone transitioning into combat mindset. The extraction window has compressed to 8 hours, and hostile forces are intensifying their search patterns. Victoria walked around the helicopter with practiced efficiency, conducting a pre-flight inspection that revealed training burned into muscle memory. She checked rotor blade integrity, examined hydraulic systems, tested control surface responsiveness, and verified fuel loads with the thoroughness of someone whose life depended on mechanical reliability in extreme conditions. "Who handled the modifications?" she asked, running her hands along sensor arrays that hadn't existed on standard military aircraft when she was last active. The technology represented years of advancement, but the fundamental principles remained familiar to someone with her specialized background. Cross consulted his phone while monitoring radio communications that suggested coordination with multiple command centers. Defense contractor specialists who've worked on your equipment preferences before. They had detailed specifications from your previous operational requirements and updated everything for current threat environments. The statement confirmed that her military service records contained information detailed enough to guide equipment customization, suggesting that her classification levels had been higher than she remembered or that her activities had been monitored more comprehensively than she had realized at the time. Victoria climbed into the cockpit and began powering up systems that responded with the smooth efficiency of perfectly maintained machinery. Instrument panels came alive with displays showing navigation data, threat assessment information, and communication links to command centers that officially didn't exist. The familiarity was both comforting and unsettling, like returning to a home she had hoped never to see again. "Intelligence package is loaded into the navigation system," Sullivan reported, handing her a secure tablet containing mission briefings that updated automatically as field conditions changed. "Tommy's team is designated Falcon 1, currently positioned in grid coordinates that should be familiar from your Afghanistan operations." Victoria scanned the tactical data while running through startup procedures that had been refined through countless training exercises and actual missions. The terrain was indeed similar to mountain operations she had flown years ago, but the political situation was far more complex, and the margin for error significantly reduced. "Support elements?" she asked, adjusting seat positions and control settings to accommodate years of physical changes since her last operational aircraft had been configured for her specifications. Cross climbed into the co-pilot seat with movements that suggested he possessed some flight training, though probably not at the level required for the mission they were contemplating. "Officially, none. This is a deniable operation with no acknowledged American presence in the area. If something goes wrong, you were never there, and we never had this conversation." The disclaimer was standard protocol for classified operations, but Victoria recognized the implications for her personal security. Success would be celebrated in classified briefings that generated no public record, while failure would result in her permanent disappearance from all official acknowledgement. "Extraction support?" Victoria continued her questioning while systems diagnostics ran through hundreds of operational parameters, verifying that 8 years of technological advancement hadn't compromised her ability to pilot advanced aircraft effectively. Sullivan consulted multiple communication devices simultaneously, coordinating with command centers and operational support elements that remained invisible to anyone without appropriate clearance levels. Emergency medical team standing by at a classified facility in Turkey, refueling station available at coordinates you'll receive once airborne, and satellite surveillance providing real-time intelligence on hostile force movements. Victoria nodded as she completed pre-flight procedures and began calculating flight paths that would minimize exposure to hostile radar systems while maintaining adequate fuel reserves for extended operations. The mission parameters were challenging but not impossible for someone with her training and experience, assuming the intelligence was accurate and support elements functioned as promised. "Let's review the personnel files for Falcon 1, she said, accepting additional tablets containing biographical information and operational backgrounds for the team she would be attempting to extract. Tommy Chen's photograph showed a man who had grown from the eager teenager she remembered into a seasoned special operations professional. Years of dangerous missions had etched lines around his eyes and added scars that spoke of close encounters with hostile forces, but his expression retained the focused determination that had made him an exceptional soldier under her command. The rest of his team consisted of Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, with extensive experience in Middle Eastern operations, counter-terrorism activities, and classified missions that appeared nowhere in official military records. Their combined expertise represented decades of specialized training and operational experience that made their potential loss a significant blow to American special operations capabilities. Mission objective for Falcon 1? Victoria asked, while studying terrain maps and identifying potential landing zones that could accommodate helicopter extraction under hostile conditions. Cross scrolled through classified briefings that revealed the complexity of the situation. Intelligence gathering operation that encountered unexpected resistance. They were documenting weapons trafficking networks when their position was compromised by forces with access to sophisticated surveillance equipment and coordination capabilities. The explanation suggested that Falcon 1 had stumbled into a larger operation involving state-sponsored activities rather than typical terrorist or criminal organizations. The level of hostile capability implied resources and training that could only come from major military powers operating through proxy forces. Victoria began calculating approach vectors and extraction procedures, while factoring in threat assessments that assumed hostile forces with access to advanced weapon systems and coordinated air defense capabilities. The mission was evolving from challenging to extremely dangerous, but her assessment of Tommy's character suggested he wouldn't have requested her involvement unless the situation was genuinely desperate. "Communication protocols?" she asked, familiarizing herself with encryption systems and radio procedures that had evolved significantly during her 8 years of civilian employment. Sullivan handed her communication equipment that included encrypted satellite phones, tactical radios with frequency hopping capabilities, and emergency beacons that could summon extraction support from classified assets positioned throughout the region. Primary contact through Falcon 1 leader, backup communications through Command Center Alpha, and emergency protocols that activate automatic extraction procedures if you miss scheduled check-ins. Victoria tested the communication systems while reviewing weather data that showed deteriorating conditions across the operational area. Storm systems were intensifying, visibility was decreasing, and wind patterns were approaching the limits of safe helicopter operations even for highly skilled pilots flying advanced aircraft. "Timeline to extraction site?" she asked, calculating fuel consumption rates and evaluating the feasibility of reaching the target area within the compressed operational window. Cross-consulted navigation computers that displayed optimal flight paths based on current intelligence about hostile force positions and air defense capabilities. 3 hours and 20 minutes direct flight, but we recommend indirect approach vectors that add 40 minutes, while reducing detection probability by approximately 60%. Victoria studied the proposed routes while factoring in her assessment of aircraft capabilities and her confidence in her ability to penetrate hostile airspace without detection. The conservative approach reduced risk but consumed precious time that Falcon 1 might not have, while direct routes offered speed at the cost of exposure to hostile fire. "I'll take the direct route," she decided, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. "Time is more important than stealth for this mission, and detection is inevitable once extraction operations begin regardless of approach vectors." Sullivan nodded with approval at her tactical assessment. Medical support standing by for wounded personnel, though intelligence suggests Falcon 1 has sustained minimal casualties so far. Their primary problem is position compromise and overwhelming hostile numbers rather than injuries requiring immediate treatment. Victoria completed her systems checks and began final preparations for departure while reviewing intelligence updates that showed hostile forces tightening their search patterns around the area where Falcon 1 was concealed. The window for successful extraction was closing faster than originally projected, and delay could result in mission failure even if everything else proceeded perfectly. "Any special equipment requirements?" she asked, noting that the aircraft's cargo compartment contained supplies and gear that hadn't been specified in the original mission briefing. Cross gestured toward equipment cases that contained specialized gear designed for high-risk extraction operations. Night vision systems, medical supplies, defensive equipment, and extraction gear, including rappelling equipment in case landing zone conditions prevent conventional pickup procedures. Victoria examined the additional equipment while calculating weight and balance implications for aircraft performance under the challenging conditions they would encounter. Every piece of gear reduced fuel efficiency and flight performance, but the supplies might prove essential if the extraction became more complicated than current intelligence suggested. "Hostile force assessment?" she asked, reviewing threat analyses that would determine her tactical approach to the extraction zone. Sullivan consulted intelligence briefings that included satellite surveillance data and electronic intelligence gathered from communications intercepts. Mixed forces including local militia with basic training and equipment but also professional military personnel with advanced weapons systems and tactical coordination suggesting state sponsorship or direct involvement. The intelligence confirmed Victoria's assessment that this mission involved more than routine counterterrorism operations, indicating that Falcon 1 had encountered forces with capabilities that matched or exceeded American special operations standards. Success would require tactical excellence and probably some degree of luck that couldn't be planned or anticipated. Victoria began engine startup procedures while finalizing her mental preparation for transitioning from 8 years of civilian life to combat operations requiring skills she had hoped never to use again. The helicopter responded to her touch with mechanical precision that suggested hours of careful preparation by maintenance crews who understood the critical nature of the mission. Emergency contingencies? She asked, running through scenarios that might require deviation from primary mission objectives. Cross-reviewed contingency plans that had been developed by specialists who understood the complexity of the operational environment. Abort criteria include weather conditions beyond aircraft capabilities, hostile force strength that prevents successful extraction, or aircraft damage that compromises flight safety. In any abort scenario, priority becomes your safe return rather than mission completion. Victoria appreciated the pragmatic approach but recognized that abort decisions would ultimately be hers to make based on conditions that couldn't be fully anticipated from intelligence briefings. Her assessment of Tommy's character and their shared history suggested that she would accept higher risk levels than mission planners might consider acceptable. The helicopter lifted off with smooth power that demonstrated the quality of the aircraft modifications and the expertise of the personnel who had prepared it for this mission. Victoria felt the familiar sensation of flight control responding to her inputs with precision that brought back memories of countless training exercises and operational missions from years when her life had been defined by moments like this. As they climbed above the Colorado mountains and turned toward international airspace, Victoria reviewed the intelligence materials one final time while part of her mind processed the irony of her situation. 8 years ago, she had walked away from this world believing that chapter of her life was permanently closed, but loyalty and professional obligation had drawn her back into circumstances that could result in her death or permanent disappearance from the civilian identity she had spent years constructing. The flight to the operational area would provide hours for mental preparation and tactical planning, but Victoria knew that no amount of preparation could eliminate the fundamental uncertainties of combat operations in hostile territory. Success would depend on her ability to integrate 8 years of civilian experience with military skills that had been dormant but never completely forgotten. Tommy Chen and his team were counting on her ability to navigate hostile airspace, locate their position under adverse conditions, and extract them from a situation that had already defeated conventional rescue attempts. The mission represented both professional challenge and personal obligation that transcended the comfortable anonymity she had maintained as a hotel housekeeper in Pinewood Valley. Below the aircraft, the familiar landscape of Colorado gave way to terrain that would gradually transform into the desert regions, where American forces operated in conditions of official denial and classified objectives. Victoria was returning to a world she had left behind carrying skills that had been disguised as obsessive housekeeping but were about to be tested under conditions where failure meant death for people who trusted her with their lives. The helicopter's advanced navigation systems displayed their progress toward operational areas where American personnel conducted missions that generated no public acknowledgement and left no official traces. Victoria was about to discover whether 8 years of maintaining perfect room service standards had preserved the tactical excellence that had once made her among the most effective pilots in classified military aviation. Communication equipment crackled with updates from intelligence centers monitoring the evolving situation, confirming that while Victoria had been living as an invisible hotel employee, the shadow world of special operations had continued evolving in ways that would challenge even her extensive training and operational experience. The mission was beginning, and there would be no opportunity to return to the safety of her carefully constructed civilian identity until Tommy Chen and his team were either successfully extracted or confirmed dead in hostile territory that officially didn't exist on any maps accessible to public scrutiny. The Syrian mountains stretched below like a moonscape of jagged ridges and deep valleys carved by millennia of wind and flash floods. Victoria maintained altitude at 8,000 feet, high enough to avoid most ground-based weapons but low enough to navigate the treacherous terrain, using visual references, rather than relying entirely on instruments that hostile forces might be monitoring or jamming. Her headset crackled with encrypted communications from Falcon 1, Tommy's voice carrying the strain of 36 hours under hostile pressure but retaining the calm professionalism she remembered from their operations together years ago. "Phoenix, this is Falcon 1. We have eyes on multiple hostile patrols converging on our position. Estimate 15 minutes before our concealment is compromised." Victoria checked her navigation displays while calculating approach vectors that would bring her to the extraction zone without exposing the aircraft to unnecessary risk from the concentrated enemy forces that intelligence reports indicated were operating throughout the region. "Copy that, Falcon 1. I'm 12 minutes out from your position. Prepare for emergency extraction procedures." The mountainous terrain below showed no signs of human habitation, but Victoria's trained eyes identified subtle indicators of military activity. Vehicle tracks that followed tactical movement patterns, communication antenna arrays positioned on strategic high points, and patrol routes that suggested coordinated search operations conducted by forces with professional military training. Agent Cross, occupying the co-pilot seat, monitored communication intercepts and satellite intelligence that provided real-time updates about hostile force movements and capabilities. "Phoenix, we're tracking increased radio traffic suggesting enemy forces are coordinating a major sweep operation. They know something valuable is in that area, and they're committing significant resources to finding it." Victoria adjusted her flight path to avoid known air defense positions while maintaining optimal approach speed for the extraction zone that Tommy's team had identified as their best option for helicopter pickup. The location was a narrow canyon with limited maneuvering space but concealment from ground observation that might allow brief landing without immediate hostile engagement. "Falcon 1, confirm your team's medical status." Victoria transmitted while reviewing emergency medical procedures and calculating cargo weight limitations that would affect aircraft performance during extraction under combat conditions. Tommy's response carried undertones of exhaustion that suggested his team had been operating under extreme stress for an extended period. "Phoenix, we have one walking wounded, minor shrapnel injuries, but all personnel are mobile and combat effective. Primary concern is ammunition supply and hostile pressure that's preventing movement to alternate extraction zones." Victoria understood the implications of Tommy's status report. His team possessed sufficient capability to reach extraction points and defend themselves during pickup operations, but they lacked resources for extended combat or the ability to relocate to areas that might offer better helicopter access under hostile conditions. The terrain ahead showed increasing signs of military activity as her aircraft approached the operational area where Falcon 1 was concealed. Radio intercepts indicated that hostile forces were operating with sophisticated command and control systems that suggested state-sponsored military units rather than typical irregular forces that American special operations teams usually encountered. "Cross, what's our intelligence assessment of enemy capabilities?" Victoria asked while fine-tuning her approach route to minimize exposure time in areas where hostile forces might have positioned anti-aircraft weapons or coordinated ground fire. Cross consulted multiple information sources simultaneously, correlating intelligence reports with real-time surveillance data that painted a concerning picture of enemy strength and organization. "Phoenix, we're looking at professional military forces with advanced equipment including portable surface-to-air missiles, coordinated communications, and tactical discipline consistent with special operations training." The assessment confirmed Victoria's growing concern that this extraction involved more than rescuing an American team from conventional hostile forces. Tommy and his people had encountered opposition with capabilities that matched their own, creating tactical challenges that would test her piloting skills and their collective ability to execute extraction procedures under intense enemy pressure. Victoria switched to the tactical frequency that would allow direct communication with Tommy's team, while maintaining encrypted contact with command centers providing operational support. "Falcon 1, this is Phoenix approaching your sector. I need current assessment of landing zone conditions and hostile proximity to extraction point." Tommy's voice carried new urgency that suggested their situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Phoenix, we have eyes on hostile patrols approximately 400 meters from our position and closing. Landing zone is clear, but expect immediate ground fire once your aircraft becomes visible to enemy forces." Victoria acknowledged the warning while calculating the timing required for successful extraction under hostile fire. Her approach would need to balance speed with precision, arriving at the landing zone with sufficient momentum to avoid prolonged exposure while maintaining control for safe touchdown and rapid personnel loading. The canyon that served as the extraction zone appeared ahead as a narrow slash between towering rock walls that provided concealment from ground observation, but created challenging flying conditions with unpredictable wind patterns and limited space for maneuvering. Victoria reduced airspeed while increasing her situational awareness for potential threats that might be concealed in the rocky terrain. Falcon 1. Mark your position with infrared strobes. Victoria transmitted while switching her helmet display to thermal imaging that would allow her to identify Tommy's team, even in the challenging terrain conditions that obscured normal visual references. The infrared signatures appeared as bright spots against the cooler background of rock formations, showing 6 personnel positioned in defensive formation around what appeared to be natural concealment that had provided protection during their extended period under hostile pressure. Victoria could see that Tommy had positioned his team with tactical excellence that maximized their ability to defend the landing zone during extraction operations. Victoria began her descent into the canyon while monitoring threat warning systems that would alert her to hostile radar locks or incoming missile signatures. The narrow walls created acoustic effects that amplified engine noise, potentially alerting enemy forces to her approach but also making it difficult for them to determine her exact position until visual contact was established. Phoenix, hostile contacts moving rapidly toward extraction zone, cross-reported while monitoring intelligence feeds that showed enemy forces converging on their location with coordination that suggested they had detected the helicopter's approach despite her attempts at tactical concealment. Victoria increased her descent rate, while preparing for immediate defensive maneuvers that might be necessary if hostile forces engaged her aircraft with weapons systems capable of threatening helicopter operations. The modified Black Hawk carried defensive equipment, including chaff and flare dispensers, but success would depend primarily on her ability to minimize exposure time through precise flying and rapid extraction procedures. The landing zone materialized as a small area of relatively flat ground surrounded by boulder fields that would provide some protection from small arms fire, but also created obstacles that could damage the aircraft if tactical maneuvering became necessary. Victoria evaluated the terrain while calculating approach angles that would allow safe touchdown despite the challenging conditions. Falcon 1. Prepare for immediate extraction. Victoria transmitted while beginning her final approach to the landing zone. I'll maintain hover for maximum 90 seconds before hostile fire makes continued operations too dangerous. Tommy's acknowledgement carried the tension of someone preparing his team for movement under enemy fire while coordinating with aircraft operations that required precise timing and flawless execution. Copy Phoenix. Team is prepared for immediate boarding. Will provide covering fire during your approach and departure. Victoria's aircraft crossed the canyon rim and dropped toward the landing zone with controlled precision that utilized every aspect of her training and experience. The helicopter responded to her inputs with mechanical reliability that allowed her to focus on threat assessment and extraction procedures rather than concerns about equipment performance under demanding conditions. Ground fire erupted from multiple positions as soon as her aircraft became visible to hostile forces positioned on the canyon walls and surrounding high ground. Automatic weapons fire sparked against armored plating while Victoria maintained her approach to the landing zone, trusting defensive modifications and her ability to minimize exposure time through aggressive flying techniques. Tommy's team returned fire with disciplined accuracy that suppressed immediate threats while moving toward the helicopter with tactical efficiency that demonstrated their special operations training and operational experience. Victoria could see muzzle flashes from positions where hostile forces were attempting to coordinate fire that could disable her aircraft or prevent successful extraction. The helicopter touched down with mechanical precision despite the challenging conditions and immediate hostile pressure. Victoria maintained engine power while monitoring systems that would alert her to damage from enemy fire or mechanical problems that could compromise their ability to depart the extraction zone safely. Loading now. Tommy's voice reported through the tactical radio while his team moved with practiced efficiency toward the aircraft. Victoria could hear additional small arms fire and the distinctive sound of explosions that suggested hostile forces were escalating their efforts to prevent the American team's extraction. Victoria felt the aircraft's weight increase as personnel and equipment were loaded into the cargo compartment, but she also noticed impacts against the fuselage that indicated continuing enemy fire despite the covering fire being provided by Tommy's team. Several warning lights indicated minor systems damage, but nothing that would prevent flight operations if they could depart the area quickly. All aboard. Tommy reported after what seemed like hours but had actually been less than 60 seconds of ground time. "We're ready for immediate departure." Victoria pulled collective and increased throttle power while initiating climbing turn that would take them out of the canyon as rapidly as possible while minimizing exposure to hostile fire from positions on the surrounding high ground. The aircraft responded normally despite the system's damage, climbing with power that demonstrated the quality of the modifications that had been installed for this mission. Hostile fire continued from multiple positions as they climbed above the canyon walls, with several impacts against armored plating that confirmed the enemy forces possessed weapons capable of threatening helicopter operations at extended ranges. Victoria implemented evasive maneuvers while maintaining climbing flight that would take them beyond effective range of ground-based weapons. "Phoenix, we're tracking multiple hostile aircraft launching from bases approximately 40 minutes from your position," Cross reported while monitoring intelligence feeds that revealed new threats to their extraction operation. Enemy air assets include attack helicopters and fighter aircraft with air-to-air capabilities. The development transformed their situation from challenging extraction to combat escape and evasion against military forces with advanced capabilities that could threaten their ability to reach friendly territory safely. Victoria calculated fuel consumption rates while identifying potential routes that might avoid interception by hostile aircraft with superior speed and weapons systems. Falcon 1, what's the intelligence value of your mission data? Victoria asked while implementing low-level flight techniques that would reduce their radar signature while increasing fuel consumption and pilot workload significantly. Tommy's response carried implications that explained the intensity of hostile response to their presence in the operational area. "Phoenix, we documented weapons transfers that implicate major powers in supplying advanced systems to terrorist organizations. The intelligence could trigger significant diplomatic consequences and operational changes throughout the region." Victoria understood that they were carrying information that hostile forces would commit substantial resources to prevent from reaching American intelligence analysts. Their escape would require not just tactical flying excellence but also strategic thinking about routes and timing that could avoid superior enemy forces while maintaining sufficient fuel for extended flight operations. The modified Black Hawk flew through mountain valleys at altitude and speed that tested both aircraft capabilities and Victoria's ability to navigate challenging terrain while avoiding detection by hostile radar systems and ground observers who would report their position to pursuing aircraft. Communication equipment provided updates about enemy search patterns and pursuit operations that confirmed multiple hostile forces were coordinating efforts to intercept their aircraft before it could reach safe areas where American military assets could provide protection or support. Victoria felt the familiar combination of professional satisfaction and mortal danger that had defined her years in special operations, when success meant survival and failure resulted in consequences that extended far beyond personal loss. Tommy and his team were depending on her ability to outfly and outthink enemy forces with superior numbers and technological advantages. The extraction had been successful, but the mission was far from complete. Victoria needed to navigate hundreds of miles of hostile territory while being pursued by forces with capabilities that matched or exceeded anything she had encountered during her previous military service, and failure would result in consequences that could affect American operations throughout the region. Behind them, the Syrian mountains showed continued signs of enemy activity as hostile forces attempted to coordinate pursuit operations that could still intercept their aircraft if weather conditions or mechanical problems reduced their ability to maintain optimal flight performance during the extended journey to safety. The Turkish border materialized through morning haze as Victoria maintained low-level flight through valleys that had concealed their escape from Syrian airspace. Behind them, hostile aircraft had abandoned pursuit after crossing into territory where American air assets provided protection that even determined enemies respected. The modified Black Hawk had performed flawlessly despite battle damage and the demanding flight conditions that had tested every system to operational limits. Tommy Chen sat in the cargo compartment with his team, finally allowing exhaustion to show after 38 hours of sustained combat stress, followed by the high-intensity extraction operation. Victoria could see him through the cabin mirror, recognizing the particular fatigue that came from missions where survival depended on maintaining perfect alertness under impossible circumstances. "Phoenix, this is Control." The radio crackled with communications from the classified facility where medical teams and debriefing specialists waited to receive Tommy's team and the intelligence they had gathered at considerable personal risk. "You are cleared for a direct approach to Landing Zone Alpha. Medical personnel are standing by for immediate evaluation of all team members." Victoria acknowledged the transmission while beginning descent procedures toward the secure facility that appeared as an unremarkable collection of buildings surrounded by terrain that could have been anywhere in the mountainous regions where American forces operated under conditions of official secrecy. The landing zone was marked with infrared strobes visible only through her helmet display systems. The helicopter touched down with mechanical precision on concrete that had been swept clean and marked with painted guidelines that would accommodate various aircraft types used for classified operations. Ground personnel approached with professional efficiency that suggested extensive experience in handling sensitive missions and personnel who required medical attention and security debriefing. Victoria shut down engines while medical teams began evaluating Tommy's people for injuries that might have been concealed during the high-stress conditions of their extended operation and dramatic extraction. The systematic approach confirmed that these facilities were accustomed to receiving personnel from missions that generated no public acknowledgement but carried significant operational importance. Phoenix, Tommy's voice carried gratitude that transcended professional appreciation as he prepared to leave the aircraft that had brought his team safely out of hostile territory. "I knew you'd come. Even when the others said it was impossible, I knew Valkyrie never abandons her people." Victoria felt emotions she had spent 8 years suppressing, recognizing that some bonds transcended official relationships and survived changes in duty status or civilian identity. Tommy had trusted her with his life and the lives of his team, and that trust had been justified by skills she had maintained, despite years of disguising them as obsessive housekeeping standards. "Take care of yourself, Tommy," she replied, watching as his team was escorted toward medical facilities where their injuries would be treated and their intelligence debriefed by specialists who understood the regional implications of what they had discovered. "Try to stay out of situations that require impossible extractions." Medical personnel approached Victoria with professional concern for pilot fatigue and potential injuries from the demanding flight conditions she had endured during the extended operation. She accepted their evaluation, while part of her mind processed the reality that her carefully constructed civilian identity would need to be reconstructed or permanently abandoned. Agent Sullivan appeared with documentation that would facilitate her return to American territory and civilian status, though Victoria recognized that her exposure during this mission had compromised the anonymity she had maintained for 8 years in Pinewood Valley. The question remained whether Victoria Hayes could continue existing or would need to be replaced by another carefully constructed identity. The intelligence Tommy's team gathered has already triggered policy discussions at the highest levels, Sullivan reported while reviewing classified communications that suggested diplomatic and military consequences extending far beyond the immediate rescue operation. "Your extraction prevented a significant intelligence loss that could have affected American operations throughout the region." Victoria nodded while recognizing that mission's success created new complications for her personal security. Hostile forces would remember the pilot who had penetrated their operational area and extracted American personnel, despite coordinated efforts to prevent their escape. Her aircraft and flying techniques had been observed and analyzed, potentially compromising techniques and capabilities that might be needed for future operations. "What's the assessment for my return to civilian status?" Victoria asked, while medical personnel completed their evaluation and confirmed that she had sustained no significant injuries during the demanding mission conditions. Sullivan consulted secure communications that suggested coordination with multiple government agencies responsible for maintaining the cover identities of personnel involved in classified operations. "Victoria Hayes can return to Pinewood Valley and resume her employment at the Alpine Lodge. Official records will show that you took emergency leave for a family situation that has now been resolved." The explanation provided cover for her absence while maintaining the civilian identity that had served her well for 8 years. Though Victoria understood that her exposure during this mission had fundamentally changed her security situation. Intelligence services that had been unaware of her existence now possessed detailed information about her capabilities and operational methods. Victoria completed the medical evaluation and administrative procedures that would facilitate her return to Colorado, while recognizing that the comfortable anonymity she had maintained was permanently compromised. Future threats might target Victoria Hayes directly, requiring security precautions that would be difficult to maintain while working as a hotel housekeeper in a small mountain town. The flight back to Colorado provided hours for processing the implications of her return to operational status and the personal satisfaction of successfully completing a mission that had reunited her with capabilities she had thought were permanently retired. The familiar sensation of aircraft control and tactical decision-making under pressure confirmed that military skills remained available despite years of civilian employment. Lisa Park, the Alpine Lodge manager, greeted Victoria's return with professional relief that suggested her absence had created operational challenges for the hotel's housekeeping department. "We managed with temporary staff, but the guest satisfaction scores weren't the same. Nobody else achieves your standards of precision and attention to detail." Victoria resumed her housekeeping duties with the same methodical excellence she had maintained for 8 years. But her awareness of surveillance possibilities and potential threats required mental adjustments that affected her approach to routine tasks. Room arrangements that had been aesthetic choices now incorporated security considerations that could provide tactical advantages if hostile situations developed. The familiar routine of making beds with military precision carried new significance after her recent return to operational flying. Each perfectly aligned corner and mathematically precise pillow arrangement represented skills that had been tested under combat conditions and proven effective for missions that officially never happened. Tommy Chen sent encrypted communications through channels that bypassed official military systems, providing updates about his recovery and the intelligence analysis that had resulted from their successful extraction. The information his team had gathered was generating policy reviews and operational changes that would affect American activities throughout the Middle East. The weapons transfers we documented have been traced to state-sponsored organizations with capabilities that threaten American interests in multiple regions. Tommy reported during a secure communications session that utilized encryption technology far more advanced than typical civilian communications equipment. "Your extraction probably prevented a significant expansion of hostile capabilities that could have cost American lives." Victoria appreciated the professional validation while recognizing that mission success had exposed her to attention from intelligence services that might view her skills as either valuable assets or dangerous security risks. Her status as an unofficial civilian with access to classified capabilities created administrative complications that government agencies might resolve through recruitment or elimination. Weeks passed with Victoria maintaining her housekeeping routine while implementing security measures that would detect surveillance or reconnaissance activities directed at her personal life or employment situation. The precautions proved justified when she observed subtle indicators that suggested her activities were being monitored by personnel with professional surveillance training. The recognition that hostile intelligence services had identified her civilian identity and Colorado location required strategic decisions about whether to relocate again or accept the risks associated with maintaining her established life in Pinewood Valley. Victoria chose to remain but implemented additional security measures that would provide early warning of direct threats. Agent Sullivan contacted her through secure communications that suggested ongoing government interest in her capabilities and availability for future missions that might require specialized piloting skills and tactical experience. The recruitment approach was subtle but persistent, indicating that her successful extraction of Tommy's team had established her value for operations that exceeded conventional military capabilities. "We have other situations developing that might benefit from your particular expertise," Sullivan indicated during encrypted conversations that avoided specific operational details while suggesting classified missions requiring unofficial participation by personnel with exceptional qualifications. Victoria declined the recruitment overtures while maintaining professional relationships that could provide intelligence about threats to her security or opportunities that might require her specialized capabilities. The balance between civilian anonymity and operational availability required careful management of relationships with government agencies that viewed her as a valuable but uncontrolled asset. The Alpine Lodge continued operating with Victoria, providing housekeeping services that consistently exceeded guest expectations and management standards. Her methodical approach to room preparation and maintenance reflected skills that had been tested under extreme conditions and proven effective for missions where precision meant survival. Years of civilian employment had not diminished her tactical abilities or operational effectiveness, as demonstrated by the successful extraction of Tommy's team from hostile territory, despite challenging conditions and superior enemy forces. The mission had confirmed that military skills remained available when circumstances required their application for purposes that justified the risks to her carefully constructed anonymity. Victoria's daily routine in Pinewood Valley incorporated security awareness and tactical thinking that had become second nature during her military service, but now served civilian purposes of maintaining safe anonymity while preserving capabilities that might be needed for future emergencies. The integration of military skills with civilian employment continued to provide perfect cover for maintaining operational readiness. Late one afternoon, while Victoria was completing her rounds at the Alpine Lodge, a young woman in civilian clothes approached with the particular combination of confidence and nervousness that marked recent military academy graduates transitioning into specialized assignments. Her bearing and movement patterns suggested aviation training and exposure to classified programs that officially didn't exist. "Excuse me, are you Victoria Hayes?" the woman asked with respect that indicated knowledge of reputation and capabilities that extended beyond civilian employment records. Victoria recognized the approach as recruitment or intelligence gathering related to her recent operational exposure, though the young woman's manner suggested genuine need rather than routine government contact. "Depends who's asking and why they want to know." The woman glanced around the hotel lobby before responding with discreet professionalism that confirmed military background and security awareness appropriate for classified discussions. "My name is Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez. I've been assigned to a program that requires specialized training, and your name was mentioned as someone who might provide guidance about career decisions." Victoria understood immediately that Sarah represented the next generation being recruited for programs similar to those that had defined her own military service, and that someone had identified her as a resource for personnel facing choices about involvement in classified operations that could fundamentally alter their lives and civilian futures. "Let's take a walk," Victoria suggested, leading Sarah toward outdoor areas where conversations could be conducted without electronic surveillance concerns that might compromise sensitive discussions about military careers and classified program participation. During their conversation, Victoria learned that Sarah possessed exceptional piloting skills and had been identified for specialized programs requiring capabilities that extended far beyond conventional military aviation training. The recruitment process involved the same careful evaluation and gradual exposure to classified activities that Victoria remembered from her own introduction to operations that officially never existed. "The decision you're facing will define the rest of your life," Victoria explained while drawing on her own experience of choosing between conventional military careers and involvement in programs that required complete commitment and acceptance of risks that could never be publicly acknowledged. "Once you cross that line, there's no returning to normal military service or simple civilian life." Sarah listened with attention that suggested she understood the significance of decisions she was contemplating, while recognizing that Victoria possessed experience and perspective that could inform choices about participation in programs that offered professional fulfillment alongside personal dangers that could not be shared with family or friends. Victoria provided guidance based on her own journey from classified military operations through civilian anonymity and back to operational status for missions that demonstrated the continuing relevance of specialized skills and the personal cost of maintaining capabilities that society required but could never officially acknowledge. The conversation concluded with Sarah expressing gratitude for perspective that would inform her career decisions, while Victoria recognized that her role as mentor represented natural evolution from operational participation to supporting the next generation of personnel who would inherit responsibility for missions that protected American interests through means that generated no public recognition. As Sarah departed to consider the choices that would determine her future involvement in classified programs, Victoria returned to her housekeeping duties with renewed understanding of how her carefully maintained skills continued serving national interests, even when disguised as civilian employment that appeared mundane to casual observers. The Alpine Lodge's guests continued enjoying superior room service provided by a housekeeper whose attention to detail reflected training and experience that few could imagine, while Victoria Hayes maintained the perfect balance between visibility and anonymity that protected both her personal security and her availability for missions that might require capabilities possessed by very few people. Years of making beds with military precision had preserved skills that saved lives and protected national interests when circumstances required their application, demonstrating that some forms of excellence transcended the contexts where they were practiced and remained available for purposes that justified the personal costs of maintaining exceptional capabilities. Victoria's carefully constructed life in Pinewood Valley continued providing cover for maintaining readiness while serving civilian purposes that brought satisfaction and community connection without compromising the security requirements that protected both her identity and the classified knowledge that remained locked in her memory. The story of Victoria Hayes would continue unfolding through years of service disguised as ordinary employment, maintaining capabilities that protected people like Tommy Chen and guided decisions for people like Sarah Rodriguez, while preserving the anonymity that allowed her to serve purposes larger than individual recognition or official acknowledgement. In the quiet mountains of Colorado, a hotel housekeeper continued making beds with precision that reflected training most people would never understand, while remaining available for missions that officially never happened but protected interests that could never be publicly acknowledged. Some legends lived not in stories or records, but in the quiet dedication of people who chose service over recognition and excellence over visibility. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.